What is on your radar today, Robby?
Well, the leak of hundreds of pages of classified U.S. intelligence documents relating to the Russia-Ukraine war and other matters is sending shockwaves throughout Washington, D.C. Last week, the FBI arrested the alleged leaker, a 21-year-old Air National Guardsman named Jack Teixeira, who ostensibly wanted to impress his online buddies and for months had published transcripts and pictures of classified documents he had accessed. This leak has prompted a reckoning among national security officials, federal policymakers, and the Biden administration. The federal government has reacted soberly, plans to hold accountable the officials whose lax security measures allowed this lapse, rethink what gets classified and what doesn't, and be straightforward and honest with the American people. I'm joking, of course. The federal government takes no responsibility for absentmindedly allowing a kid who graduated high school 2 years ago to swipe hundreds of pages of ostensibly sensitive materials, though in reality, much of this information did not need to be kept secret in the first place. On the contrary, the U.S. people deserve honesty about the situation in Ukraine. No one in power is going to say, sorry, we screwed up. Quite the opposite. They're going to say, we need vast new powers to surveil more Americans so that we can stop citizens from having access to our secrets. Don't take my word for it. They're already saying that. Here's NBC News, which is hardly some paranoid anti-deep state website. Quote, the Biden administration is looking at expanding how it monitors social media sites and chat rooms after U.S. intelligence failed to realize classified Pentagon documents circulated online for weeks, officials briefed on the matter say. The article goes on to quote a senior official who says the Biden administration is looking at, quote, expanding the universe of online sites that intelligence agencies and law enforcement authorities track. Note the casual language. They're expanding their universe. It's like Marvel finally bringing the X-Men into the MCU, except not at all. Any additional law enforcement power to monitor online websites and forums will undoubtedly be misused. The federal government will never constrain itself and only surveil genuine national security threats. It will always target domestic dissent, contrarian viewpoints, and free speech itself. We know this. Time and time again, we have watched as the various heads of this federal hydra, the State Department, the FBI, the CDC, Homeland Security, the White House, have sunk their fangs into Twitter and Facebook and other social media sites. What begins as a supposedly legitimate effort to root out foreign influence on matters of national security quickly mutates into an expansive campaign against any and all misinformation. Misinformation now being defined as anything the regime declares against the interests of the so-called experts who staff its bureaucracy. Imagine what would happen if the federal government was given more resources by Congress to monitor online chat rooms like Discord. Well, we know exactly where this would lead. Federal authorities would identify politically disfavored speech, right-wing, contrarian, libertarian, leftist, in these chat rooms. They would start communicating with the administrators of these sites, flagging the disfavored speech. A coalition of nonprofits, academics, and watchdog organizations would work with the federal authorities to identify an ever-increasing number of hotspots for this disfavored speech. The mainstream media would publish article after article about the dangers of unrestricted misinformation in these forums. Congressional Democrats would then demand hearings on this urgent, pressing problem, and ultimately the administrators of the chat rooms would cave and shut them down. They might even give the government information on the participants. The founders of this country possessed a healthy, if imperfect, libertarian streak, which is why they were deeply skeptical of an empowered federal government. In fact, they came up with an important list of rights that were off the table for the federal government. The feds couldn't abridge them, no matter how badly they wanted to. These included due process, search and seizure, freedom of speech, among others. So it's deeply unfortunate, but in the 200-plus years since the founding, we have not been watchful enough, and the state has abused some of these freedoms, particularly at the intersection of national security. It's all Patriot Acts all the time. We can't give up another single inch of territory in this fight. Any and all calls to give the federal government more power to hunt for intelligent leakers on the internet should be rejected out of hand. So I was particularly annoyed to see this. Of course, they say, in the wake of a mistake they made, we need new power to watch you. You have to be watched more closely.
It's difficult to argue with that, and I have no interest in doing so. You know, given the incredible amount of funding that they have, given the amount of that funding that they can't, frankly, keep track of, with the Pentagon having failed, 5 audits in a row. There was a viral clip that went around, I think, last week with Jon Stewart, where he was really grilling a national security individual about...
It was just weapons for militias in Afghanistan. Not a big deal.
Right. Like, do you really know what an audit is, John? Like, it was a really revealing interview in a lot of ways. But all of that background, and then to claim, given all of the expansions of the security state that you've described, that we just need a little bit more and we could have prevented this from happening, it's ridiculous. It is true that there are going to sometimes be leaks. And it's difficult to assess to what extent this one was preventable, whether this was some internal practice that they should change. But they need to be able to explain that before they ask for more money. How much money do you need to keep this 21-year-old from having access to documents that he doesn't need to have? Is there a different kind of protocol that you could put in place that doesn't require spending more money? Like, maybe that guy isn't allowed to take his cell phone or any other kind of camera into the room where there are these sensitive documents. Why weren't those sensitive documents?
Yeah, what happened to what's the room called where they go in and there's no electronics? That's where they do this top secret discussions. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, or to your point, a point that you make often, are these documents really not that top secret? That's why they're not under such lock and key. And is this just a lot of hot air that's being blown because of the nature, the embarrassing nature of some of the disclosures? Who knows? But it is the government is almost never forced to articulate what it is going to be able to do with the money that they're demanding that's actually going to be connected to whatever leak they're trying to stop. And we saw this with the Restrict Act. They're talking about TikTok bans. There's a lot of energy over that because of people's fears about China and the loss of U.S. hegemony and all of this. But when you look at what the Restrict Act actually is, it's so much more expansive than actually a limitation on TikTok. And this is how you get these shoehorned policies in, these shock doctrine moments where there's this expansion of government power. And I think that you're right that people need to keep both eyes open.
Because we know exactly what would happen. We know it'll begin as, we're just looking for intelligence leaks, just national security threats. But we've already seen how the state does not limit itself to that issue. Then it becomes, again, FBI looking for, this is a joke tweet about the election. It might cause someone to vote on the wrong day. If it's like, hey, Republicans, didn't you hear the election is this day? Or hey, Democrats. Thinking that some action should be taken against that. That's exactly what they'll do to Discord. Yeah. And then the mainstream media will assist them because the overlap between law enforcement, current and former law enforcement sort of national security advisors appearing in mainstream and on mainstream platforms, suggesting all these actions be taken, and the mainstream media has bought it hook, line, and sinker. That it's so dangerous to have all these unrestricted speech spaces. That it's vulnerable to corruption by Russia, et cetera.
Yeah, it's regrettable that the Twitter file seems to be ramping down, and we didn't get this far. But I'd be interested to know about the algorithm piece of it, because so many leftists were concerned that exactly this has been happening on Twitter for a very long time, that there is an incentive to filter for certain kinds of terms. And we talked about this, I think, last week, that they're going to start looking at terms like red pill and Chad and incel that target certain communities. And there's concerns on the left that similar things are being done. And people who have said that they feel like they've been limited on Twitter for quite some time. We never got that far, but the bulk of the way that surveillance happens on social media is via how the algorithm is programmed. And I can imagine a world where algorithms are used to comb through this kind of public Discord data in the same way that disproportionately targets less mainstream politics, whether on the right or the left. So that is a really valid concern.
And it is funny, too, that it seems to be, a kind of fringe right libertarian fear of government and surveillance animated the community the leaker was a part of. Like, you can see the Onion headline, paranoid anti-government militia people. Are we watching them enough? Like, that's exactly what they're worried about.
Yeah.
More Rising right after this.